I'm going to call this video Deerfields Day of Mourning. As you look at the Battle of Cedar Creek highway marker there, showing you where the Battle of Cedar Creek took place in October the 19th, 1864, Cedar Creek, Virginia. And the reason we're calling this Deerfields Day of Mourning is because of a marker that is in one of the local cemeteries placed there. You'll hear a little bit about this as we get on with the video here. But we'll go back to 1991 and 1992 and play you some video from the event known as Deerfield Day. That went on for a couple different years in October of 91 and 92. And part of that event was to remember the 6 young men from Deerfield who were killed during the Battle of Cedar Creek. So I hope you enjoy the video. And then at the very end of the video, there's going to be a Civil War reenactment group doing a little demonstration there for us. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for tuning in. Hope maybe you'll learn a little something from the video here.
North to subdue Johnston and join Grant if necessary, and with Sheridan's forces about to turn from destructive raids to cooperation in the main theater of war against Lee, and with the Confederacy blockaded and Union forces supreme on the water, the surrenders of Lee and Johnston, signifying the military end of the war, not far in the distance. Thank you very much.
I know that is extremely informative. I'd like to say that we have some of the relatives of the boys that fought at the Battle of Cedar Creek. I know in particular Mr. Ramsey. I think it was a great uncle, but there might be others. I want to read a brief, an excerpt rather from a brief program. I wrote this as inspired by what was written by the daughters of the American Confederates. We're here today to honor young men from the Deerfield Valley who gave their lives for the state of Virginia in the Confederate cause on October 19, 1864. They were buried a short distance from here at the Rocky Springs Cemetery on October 21st, 1864. That was 127 years ago. Their last names were Armstrong, Black, Gwynn, Lange, Ramsey, Wanless, and McClung. As I said, some of their relatives are with us here today. These soldiers, the day these soldiers were buried was called the saddest day in the history of this community. It was known as Deerfield's Day of Mourning. And a relative, which is Hank, he told me a story that was that he had heard over the years that the bodies of the 6 of these boys that were killed in the same day were brought to Deerfield in a wagon, an army wagon, and these particular boys were all brought together from that battle. We can only imagine the emotion and the feelings of the families, neighbors, and friends as they stood in the Rocky Springs Cemetery on that sad day 127 years ago and watched 6 of their native sons buried at the same time. Deerfield was a small community of only 60 people at that time. I'm sure the grief of each family was shared by all in the community. And let me remind you that this monument is located at the Rocky Springs Cemetery that will remind you of these heroic dead. We're reminded of the words of General Robert E. Lee, who made the following comments about war. But what a cruel thing is war, to separate and destroy families and friends, and to mar the purest joys and happiness God has granted us in this world, to fill our hearts with hatred instead of love for our neighbors, and to devastate their fair face from this beautiful world. I think it'd be very appropriate today for us to have a moment of silence for these 7 young men from Deerfield Valley. If you'll just bow your head with me for a moment of silence in remembrance of them. Amen. Thank you so much. We have a very wonderful privilege to present a special guest and guest. We're here today. This day was named to honor the memory of 6 young men from Deerfield Valley who gave their lives for the cause of Virginia. In 1864, whether it was a just cause or not, only history can record that, but in their day they were committed to what they fought and died for. They're buried at the Rocky Springs Cemetery, so many of them are not remembered, but their last names are Armstrong, Black, Gwynn, Lange, Ramsey, and Wanless. So this is the idea of Deerfield Day was born from that Deerfield monument called Deerfield Day of Mourning. Only 60 residents lived here during that time period. These young men all gave their lives in 1864 on October the 19th. That was 10% of his whole community was wiped out. We have as a special guest to honor their memory, come at this time, Mr. Brock Nicely. Let's give him a great big Deerfield Valley welcome. Mr. Brock Nicely.
On behalf of the Palmetto Sharpshooter Regiment, which is all based in Stanton, and members of the 5th Virginia Company E, which is based in Greenville, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting us. Last year we could not make it because of we were actually doing the reenactment of Cedar Creek, where these men lost their lives. The job that we try to do is the fact that we try to recreate that time period. And everyone's in reenacting for a different phase. Both of these units here are based locally. Some are made up out of a variety of occupations. We have everybody from people who pour concrete to school teachers to correction guards to state troopers to doctors to whatever. Our job is to try to preserve a little bit of history and try to interpret it to others, and we try to do as much as we can locally to support as many of our local communities that are possible. 128 years ago, the Valley of Virginia, it was 1863, or correction, 1864, and the Federals had been repulsed at Newmarket. They changed commanders from Franz Sigel to Black Dave Hunter, as we refer to him down in Rock Ridge County, and Hunter came down, engaged the Confederates at the Battle of Piedmont, defeated them there, and then moved on to Lexington, where he burned the Institute, and then moved on to Lynchburg, where he was finally repulsed by Jubal Early and pursued to Salem and Hanging Rock. And then the valley was clear of Federals for a brief period of time, and Jubal Early made another lightning march similar to the ones that Jackson made, and actually threatened the city of Washington, and McCausland burned the town of Chambersburg. I think it's Maryland or Pennsylvania. I'm not a geographical expert, so I can't testify. But anyway, it was one of those Union towns. And after that time period, things in the valley kind of calmed down. Grant had been forced to pull two of his major units away from the Petersburg lines to deal with this Confederate force running rampage in the northern part of the valley. Afterwards, Grant and Sheridan got together, and Sheridan was given command of the valley, and his orders were that the valley be destroyed, that all the farms, all the provisions that could be, anything of use that could be used for the Confederacy was to be destroyed. So starting in October of '64, starting in the fields north of Stanton and proceeding clean to Winchester, and using the mountains as boundaries, two Federal Infantry Corps along with Custer's Cavalry Corps burned everything they could get their hands on. He was pursued down the valley by Tom Rosser and engaged at a place called Tom's Brook, which eventually wound up being a Confederate cavalry defeat. Sheridan got kind of complacent, and Early was close by at Newmarket and moved up the valley, and in a surprise morning attack actually overran the Federal positions, and throughout the day pushed the Federal Corps back into a lot of defensive positions. The Confederates were fighting for their homeland, and men from this community were in part of that Confederate force. The Confederates were outnumbered at least 3-1. I was been told that Sheridan had more cavalry on the field than what Early did infantry. The Confederates going through the camp, seeing the Federal provisions, decided they needed a lot to eat, and the battle started falling apart at that point. Sheridan made his famous ride from Winchester down, and the evening the Federals had reformed their lines and actually wound up holding the field and recapturing most of it, as well as most of their artillery. What we have here today, and the guys are going to do for you, they're going to do a loading demonstration and firing demonstration. Now, we're only got 4 or 5 guys here. You can imagine with several thousand men on the field doing this at one time, the mass of men, confusion of artillery fire going off. And the one thing we don't have to deal with is probably the fear of dying. I know it's been hot enough a couple times I thought I was dead, but it's a little bit different for us, and it is a hobby. They will try to do it as authentic as possible. If you have little children, I advise you to grab their ears a little bit when they get ready, when they bring the muskets up. And I'd also, when it's over with, I'd like for you to, if you get a chance, come by and check out our campsite. We will try to tell you as much as we know. If we don't know, we'll be honest enough to tell you that also. The guys have some nice layouts for you. So this is Captain Mike Roush of the Company E, 5th Virginia.
Hey!
Two things I'd like to mention is the fact that these men are from two different units. They also use two different drill manuals. One is the Hardy's drill manual, which is known to be used by federal forces, and the other one also is using Gillum. So that's why when you see shoulder arms and some go to different positions, it's because they're from two different units, and the manual is done just a little bit different. Also, the fact the average soldier on both sides could load and fire that musket every 20 seconds. An artillery piece could be fired every 30 seconds. So technology had really come about by that time. Thank you for inviting us.